The Prime Minister knows, even if doesn't accept, that there is a need to compromise and avoid confrontations. But as I have said, it is his political personality which will not allow him to make such compromises. All through his political career as Chief Minister of Gujarat and later on Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi has never had this situation of having him as a normal politician who loses majority, who gains majority, therefore who gives and takes, who accepts that the other side also has power at their disposal. This is something where the denial comes, that the Prime Minister refuses to accept that this is part of the game. In electoral politics, you have to make compromises once you lose majority, etc.
But you're saying something very interesting. You're saying he realizes instinctively that he is, as you call him, the most uncomfortable person in the new Lok Sabha, and yet his personality doesn't let him do anything substantial about it. In other words, he's trapped by his personality.
And would be angry with it.
So there will be a certain amount of anger bubbling within him because he's unable to break free of his personality.
Yeah, that's why I said that he would be the most uncomfortable person, because he knows the situation in which he is, but is not prepared to therefore mend his ways.
And presumably this will start showing in his manner, in his behavior, in things that he says, because these feelings of uncomfortableness are impossible to hide and suppress.
Oh yes, it would show in the parliamentary procedures and the way the parliament would proceed functioning. But more than that, it would show in the way the government operates vis-a-vis various sections of the society.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Is Prime Minister Narendra Modi the most uncomfortable person in the new Lok Sabha? That's the considered view of my guest today. Joining me to explain why he's come to that conclusion is the Chief Editor of Studies in Indian Politics and Co-Director of the Lok Niti Program on Competitive Democracy, Professor Suhas Palshikar. Professor Palshikar, in a piece you wrote for the Indian Express on Monday, you said, on the one hand, Narendra Modi believes he has a mandate for a third term, but on the other hand, he's lost his majority and his government cannot survive without the support of allies. You say this mismatch will lead to unavoidable awkwardness. Can you start by explaining this point further?
You know, in politics, when you realize that you have lost majority and yet trying to cobble up a majority through a coalition, you extend a spirit of cooperation with your opposition, not just with your allies. If that doesn't happen, then there is an awkwardness both in your positions that you take, but also an awkwardness in the relationship among political parties. And that marks the political system with a certain tension. And that's why the term awkwardness, that nobody knows how to negotiate with the government. The government doesn't know how to negotiate with the opposition.
In other words, neither party knows or neither side knows how to talk to each other, how to relate to each other.
Yes, and I guess we'll have time later on to discuss this point. My larger point, therefore, is when both the ruling party and the opposition overinterpret the outcome of an election, this awkwardness necessarily results.
I'll come to that in a moment's time. But about the tension that is likely to exist between the opposition and the government, you say the BJP is arguing victory in the face of defeat. And you say this will make politics more shrill, abusive, and unproductive. Does this mean that the next 5 years are likely to be difficult, perhaps even troublesome, if that's the right word?
Yes, difficult for parliamentary democracy, because parliamentary democracy is predicated on certain conventions and a maturity of sort of spirit of give and take. It is difficult also because it would mean that the relations of different sections of the society with the government would be marked by tension. there would be a tension because the government would be unwilling to concede anything to them. It would say that, oh, we have got a third term. Where are you? It's not just two terms. We have made history by coming to power for the third time. Probably the only leader who could manage this earlier was Jawaharlal Nehru. So this idea of something historical happening around and the ruling party being the hero of that history is the root cause of this tension.
Quite right. And the truth is that the opposition doesn't accept that something historical has happened. The opposition questions that very interpretation, and that adds to the tension between the government and the opposition.
Certainly, because the opposition, on the other hand, thinks that the government has been defeated and it has now come to power only because of certain arithmetic calculations.
Absolutely. Let's at this point, Professor Palshikar, introduce some very interesting things you say about Narendra Modi. You write, Narendra Modi, you write, and I'm quoting you, the Prime Minister will be the most uncomfortable person in the new Lok Sabha because his party is in a minority, because of the demands of his allies, and because the opposition is nearly as big as his own party. Therefore, ideally, you say, he needs to be modest and moderate in comparison to his carefully cultivated, larger-than-life image. Do you think the Prime Minister accepts that he is the most uncomfortable person in the Lok Sabha and therefore that he needs to be modest and moderate? Or do you think he's in essential denial of this?
There is partly an acceptance, I think, in the first part. The Prime Minister knows, even if doesn't accept, that there is a need to compromise and avoid confrontations. But as I have said, it is his political personality which will not allow him to make such compromises. All through his political career as Chief Minister of Gujarat and later on Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi has never had this situation of having him as a normal politician who loses majority, who gains majority, therefore who gives and takes, who accepts that the other side also has power at their disposal. This is something where the denial comes, that the Prime Minister refuses to accept that this is part of the game. In electoral politics, you have to make compromises once you lose majority, etc.
But you're saying something very interesting. You're saying he realizes instinctively that he is, as you call him, the most uncomfortable person in the new Lok Sabha, and yet his personality doesn't let him do anything substantial about it. In other words, he's trapped by his personality.
And would be angry with it.
So there will be a certain amount of anger bubbling within him because he's unable to break free of his personality.
Yeah, that's why I said that he would be the most uncomfortable person because he knows the situation in which he is, but is not prepared to therefore mend his ways.
And presumably this will start showing in his manner, in his behavior, in things that he says, because these feelings of uncomfortableness are impossible to hide and suppress.
Oh yes, it would show in the parliamentary procedures and the way the parliament would proceed functioning. But more than that, it would show in the way the government operates vis-a-vis various sections of the society.
Against this background, Professor Palshikar, you say relationships in parliament are likely to be difficult and acrimonious. You write, and once again, I'm quoting you, there will be more direct confrontation between the main ruling party and the opposition because the BJP would be licking its wounds, seeking opportunities to delegitimize the opposition, and the opposition would be eager to flex its muscles because of its belief that the people have rejected the BJP. To take a very recent example, doesn't this mean that controversies like the ones we've seen in the last few days over the pro tem speaker, over the deputy speaker are going to proliferate and they will polarize parliament and make for a very acrimonious relationship?
Certainly, the nomination of the same person as speaker who was responsible for disqualifying almost the entire opposition in the last Lok Sabha is in a sense an indication, it's a red flag for the opposition that, look, we are not going to compromise. Now it would be interesting to see if the newly nominated candidate of the BJP for Speaker's post, when he gets elected, will he actually disqualify all 200 odd MPs, which would be another history to his sort of credit or discredit, as you may call it.
But you know, again, this points to the fact that the Prime Minister is the most, and the phrase you used is very important, uncomfortable person in the Lok Sabha. He's responsible for Om Birla being nominated for a second term. He's aware of the relationship Om Birla has with the opposition parties. He's aware that Mr. Birla expelled over 145 MPs in one day. Therefore, when he nominates Mr. Birla for a second term, he's in a sense not just raising a red flag, he's throwing a gauntlet down on the floor. He's, in a sense, challenging the opposition deliberately and defiantly.
Definitely, and even this small piece of drama over the question of constitution, both sides sort of raising the idea that they are the protectors of the constitution. The Prime Minister going back 50 years in history and telling that you were responsible for bringing the emergency, and the opposition saying that today, here and now, you are violating the constitution, which we are set to protect. That, in a sense, signals the kind of confrontations we are likely to witness on the floor of the House.
This also means, doesn't it, Professor Palshikar, that Parliament has got off to a very rocky, troubling start. The disputes over pro tem speaker, speaker and deputy speaker, the comments made about the emergency or an undeclared emergency, all of this is the two sides taunting each other, jabbing at each other, trying to irritate and annoy each other, and succeeding as well.
Yes, succeeding, and that is bad for parliamentary work, parliamentary procedures.
And this, I presume, will continue right through the 5 years if it doesn't escalate and get worse.
Yes, it would escalate. It would escalate outside of the house of the houses of the parliament. And I would dare say that that would also, in a sense, give the Prime Minister an opportunity to actually dissolve the Lok Sabha at an opportune time of his convenience and say that I want a full mandate.
There is therefore a risk, as far as the opposition is concerned,
Yes.
that this fractious relationship with the government could prompt the Prime Minister to dissolve the Lok Sabha early and look for a full mandate.
Yes, there would be a play of brinkmanship all along for the next couple of years at least. Everyone, the allies of the BJP itself, and the opposition would be playing that game of brinksmanship where everyone would trying each other's patience and perseverance.
So if brinkmanship is the name of the game between the opposition and the government, governance, parliamentary etiquette, parliamentary debates will suffer, surely.
Yes, both parliamentary etiquettes will suffer, governance too will suffer. Governance will suffer also because of the internal wrangling among the NDA partners. So many reasons why governance would be a casualty.
Now you write about the nature and character of the Modi government over the next 5 years, and you say that there will be no substantive change in the government's behavior when you compare the last 10 years to the next 5. Again, I'm quoting you, the Modi regime will soon return to its core features. Weaponization of state power to suppress dissent, coupled with intolerance of routine opposition, delegitimization of all institutions through their political capture, and a well-defined majoritarian politics that will stigmatize the majorities. In other words, what people consider the worst of Mr. Modi over the last 10 years is likely to continue over the next 5 years.
Yes, and that's because it's not a question of whether it is the best or the worst, but because what 2014 brought was not just a change of government, but gradually it also brought a change in regime. And the characteristics that you read out, which I have listed, are actually the characteristics of this new regime. Elections bring out new governments, but when governments think that they are destined to change the entire society, they tend to sort of behave as a new regime. That is what has happened in the case of the BJP government, since 2014.
And the characteristics of the government that came into power on the 9th will be very similar to the characteristics of the government that went out of power in June last year. In other words, the same characteristics will continue.
Yes, they will continue, because that is where the term third term, the usage of the third term thing comes into play. That is a third term, which means that for the BJP, it's a continuation of their entire politics of changing whatever was there prior to 2014.
In fact, you're making a very important point. The more the BJP, the Prime Minister stress this is a third term, the more they're also saying there will be continuity, the behavior will be the same, the characteristics of the government will be the same. And that is, in a sense, typified by the fact that most of the top ministers are the same and they've retained the same portfolios. Now the speaker will be the same. Everything is continuing as it was previously.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Now, in your Indian Express article, Professor Palshikar, you see 4 areas where there could be clear fault lines for the government. Let's briefly touch on each of those 4 one by one. The first, you say, is the handling of unemployment and the frustrations of youth. Are you saying that the Modi government cannot accept and therefore cannot respond to the reality of unemployment, and now, additionally, the reality of entrance test exams which are going all wrong? These are major crisis points for the young, but the Modi government is unable to recognize it and unable to respond to it, which is why this is a fault line.
Yes, this is one flashpoint, not just because of the fiasco of entrance examinations more recently, but even otherwise. In our survey that the Lokniti did, a large majority of the people pointed out that the most important worrying thing for them at the time of voting was Rozgar, was unemployment, was this question of poverty. And I think I would call it a Manipur method that the government would adopt, that just the problem doesn't exist or it would go away on its own without the government doing anything. The government believes that unemployment is something which need not be addressed by the government on priority basis. That's why a flashpoint.
So even though unemployment is arguably the single most important pressing concern for young India, the government will turn a deliberate blind eye to it. It will behave as if it doesn't exist and it will ignore it.
Yes.
The second fault line, you say, is center-state relations, which you believe will produce sharper regional identities and regionalist demands. Does this also mean there will be differences, perhaps even discord with allies like the TDP and JDU? Those are the major regional allies the BJP has.
Both these major regional allies and some others like the Shiv Sena are really so tamed currently that they won't really raise these issues. But the government will also take care that rather than them, the other parties which are in power at the state level will be bothered with the stick of the governor. And that would create the questions of interstate relations. West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Punjab, these are some of the few examples.
So the behavior of someone like Governor Ravi, to use him as an example in Tamil Nadu, will be replicated in West Bengal, where already Mr. Ananda Bose is behaving not
Yes.
similarly. It will be replicated in Punjab. It will be replicated wherever the state government is different to and opposed to the BJP.
Yes, and when that happens, ordinary people from those states, rather than taking up these constitutional niceties about what the governor should do and should not do, will be tempted to take up regionalist, identity based positions, and some regionalist demands would start flaring up in these areas.
Could that fracture or at least create tensions for the federal unity of the country? Or is that an exaggerated concern?
I don't know whether it would really hurt the federal unity, but it would hurt the federal structure for sure.
The third fault line, you say, is a caste census and reservations. Will this be mainly a problem between the JDU and the BJP because the JDU has nailed its colors to a caste census and reservations that flow from that census very clearly and obviously? Or is it a wider problem?
It's a wider problem also because the report of the Rohini Commission is not acted upon yet. There are increasing demands about crossing the 50% mark, Maharashtra included. Everywhere these demands are coming up. The demands by various intermediate communities, peasant proprietary castes, Patidars, Jats, Marathas, for inclusion in backward category, OBC category, are waiting for a decision. So it's not just Bihar, it's not just JDU, it's a larger problem. And the government, which has been unable to undertake an ordinary census, will be now challenged to also undertake caste census and do something about this entire question of backwardness.
This could become a major problem for the BJP and Narendra Modi specifically because he and the party have set themselves against a caste census. They've publicly said so many times. Now, if they're under pressure to hold one from people who are either their own allies or on whose support they depend, this could become a major problem for him.
Yes, and it would also become a problem because it is these OBC communities which have not just after Modi came, even earlier have been the voters of the BJP in large proportions. So the BJP, in a sense, has to tread carefully on this question because it is its own electoral base for the last 20-25 years.
Now, the fourth fault line, Professor Palshikar, is what you call vigilante adventurism against Muslims, with the state simply behaving like a passive onlooker. But let me point this out to you. Both JDU and TDP have substantial Muslim constituencies. Though they may be tamed by the BJP, can they afford to let anti-Muslim behavior, anti-Muslim rhetoric proliferate without losing support and credibility from the constituencies that they depend upon?
Sure, that would be a major test of the relationship between these two allies and the BJP. While they wouldn't want it, the BJP and the government over the past 5-7 years has actually given a blank check to vigilante activists. And though the government itself might not be accused of directly hurting Muslim interests, it has allowed Muslim interests to be cornered, Muslim identity to be cornered over the last 6-7 years. And how these two things play out would actually determine the relationship between the allies and the BJP within the NDA. I agree. But at the same time, I would suspect that the BJP would find ways to continue with the same cultural practices of marginalizing the Muslims.
In which case, could this fault line become a breaking point between the JDU and the TDP on the one hand and the BJP on the other?
For the TDP, it would be easier to break away from the BJP because it has, in a sense, its own base in Andhra Pradesh. In Bihar, the JDU is on the back foot. Assembly elections are just a year ahead, and where the BJP would have to support the JDU would need its support. So that is where I suspect that the JDU and Nitish Kumar, despite their secular credentials in the past, would simply cave in and accept the BJP's role in these vigilante actions. They won't fight back.
which also means that the relationship from the BJP perspective with the TDP could be a more tricky and difficult one, because Chandrababu Naidu has the capacity to go it alone if need be.
Yes, that's, I think among the BJP allies, I think he would be the really more challenging ally of the BJP.
Now, you say the government's response to these four fault lines, which we've discussed, will be a combination of high-handed treatment, emotional appeals deflecting the issues, and setting one section of society against the other. But if these are serious and deep fault lines, which they are, then this sort of response is not only an inadequate response, but it's also a provocative response. This response can make the fault lines worse.
Yes, but unfortunately, the BJP worries the least about the responses of the people. The BJP doesn't worry about situation worsening, because over the last 10 years, it has come to believe that in a sense, it has the capacity to weather all these storms simply with the appeal of the Prime Minister. That is what the BJP thinking would be at the moment. Secondly, the BJP would also think that as the economy grows, as it is expected to grow according to BJP's calculations, some of these things can be probably become subdued. They can be sort of sidelined. They would be less important. That thinking that the growth in the economic sphere might probably be an antidote to some of these issues is another way the BJP would be thinking about these issues.
But can they really rely on the Prime Minister's personal appeal and charisma at a time when he is a weakened Prime Minister? He's led his party to its worst result in 10 years. He's lost his majority. Even in his own constituency, something like 3.2 lakh people less voted for him this time compared to 2019. So can they really rely on his charisma in these circumstances?
That's their only asset. In the last 10 years, the BJP has lost that capacity of going to the people and talking to them. It's only one person who talks to people. And therefore, the BJP's only asset is Modi. Even if a weakened Modi, he still continues for the BJP to be the only sort of escape route.
In other words, the only option the BJP has is to rely on the Prime Minister's personality and charisma, even though there are serious question marks about how effective that personality and charisma now can be hereafter. But they have no alternative.
Yes, I think that's where they are stuck.
Finally, your analysis, Professor Palshikar, leads to my last question. It suggests that India could be entering a very divided and possibly even dangerous phase in its democratic politics. On the one hand, we have an emboldened opposition. On the other hand, we have a weakened Prime Minister, but in denial about the fact that he's weaker. And at the same time, we have serious fault lines that may not get the attention they deserve and may in fact get the wrong sort of attention. In these sort of circumstances, perhaps anything could happen. Am I right?
Absolutely, anything can happen. And that means that here we are not simply talking about the so-called democratic backslide or the slowdown of democracy. We have a combination of a truncated dominance of the ruling party, the main ruling party, with an ambition continued that it wants to change the society its way. It is this dichotomy, it is this, in a sense, duality which has a tension, that you don't have now that kind of legitimacy electorally and politically, but the ambition continues, and that ambition will lead to more suppression. It would also lead to more protests. It would also lead to popular resistances in unexpected quarters and in unexpected ways. If you don't allow the opposition to work as it should work in a parliamentary democracy, if you don't treat opposition parties as, in the sense, a possible way of negotiating these problems, then the only way out would be that there would be a rupture and probably an eruption of unexpected disturbances.
You put it beautifully, Professor Palshikar. There is now a serious mismatch between the BJP's ambition on the one hand, and that ambition continues unaltered. It is still as great and it is still determined to change the country in ways that the BJP believes desirable. And on the other hand, the party's capacity, which is diminished, the party's numbers in parliament are down, the party's dependence on allies has grown, the prime minister himself is perceived to be weaker, and this mismatch between capacity and power on the one hand and ambition on the other can lead to all sorts of problems emerging as we go down the next 5 years.
That's right. I mean, one hopes that there would be better sense among the players, but one fears that that is how things would unfold in very unsavory manner.
Professor Palshikar, thank you very much for this extremely insightful analysis and for that wonderful phrase, which I will repeat once again, because I think it sums up the position of the Prime Minister. He will be the most uncomfortable person in the new Lok Sabha. He knows it, but his personality will not let him do anything about it. In a sense, he's trapped by his personality. I thank you for this analysis. Take care.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.